All right, hi everyone. I'm just going to quickly see if I can get the link so I can post it to Slack in case anybody is interested. Otherwise, it's going to be on YouTube afterwards, and I will post the link on Slack then as well. That works. So, we were talking last time about segmentation and targeting and positioning, and I just want to give a recap of what we did. So I'm going to quickly bounce over to the slides that I had before and share my screen. Regrettably, I'm going to share the entire screen. An infinite loop. There we go. Okay, so we were talking about segmentation targeting as well as positioning. We talked about consumer behavior, why it's necessary for marketers. We watched Addison's Wonderland, and we talked about market segmentation and how we're basically breaking the market up into different things. Talked a little bit about why we segment the market in terms of looking at different needs, consumer needs, making sure that consumers are able to identify with the product and vice versa, as well as have marketing actions that actually get at the actual market segment we're talking about. Talk a little bit about different market strategies, how you can have different products for different markets. You can have the same product for an entire market or different products for different markets. So here we are identifying the market needs, looking at what kinds of products and services we're offering, what those features actually have, and how to link those needs to marketing actions. We talked then about breaking up the market to different things such as demographic, psychographic, geographic, by behaviors, by product attributes and the benefits of those attributes. And we talked about performance-based segmentation and benefits segmentation. I just want to make sure that I'm doing this right. Okay. Nice. Share. Stop. Okay, there we go. Okay, just making sure everything is okay. All right, let me share the screen again. We'll go back to slides. All right, so we talked about grouping potential segments. In particular, we're trying to make a lot of similarity of needs within a segment and differences between needs among the segments. Why do we do that? Well, we had talked about wanting, again, to make sure that we have products that address consumer needs, the appropriate needs, and therefore consumers would respond appropriately to marketing actions. Remember, we want to be able to have marketing investments that actually make sense relative to our market segments and our target markets. So making sure that there's similarity within the segment means that we get the best return on marketing investment. We then talked about grouping, okay, and we talked about how do we decide which markets to target. So looking at market size, okay, larger markets seem to make sense. Looking at expected growth, so if we have a small market but it could potentially grow, there's growth potential in targeting that market. So take, for instance, millennials. We've obviously spoken at length about different generational cohorts and how they could potentially provide more growth opportunity. Looking at competitive positioning, look how much it costs to reach the segment. If we have to do additional marketing towards millennials, then that makes sense that it would cost us more because we have to go and market in different places. We have to invest in social media that we didn't invest in previously. We have to invest in new technologies we hadn't invested in previously. So all of these things are going to increase the cost of reaching these market segments. And then obviously compatibility with organizational objectives and resources. If the organization is doing one thing and we need to create a product that completely goes out of what the norm of this organization is, it's going to maybe make us think about not targeting that market. There may be growth opportunities, yes, but does it fit with the organizational objectives? Again, as we've talked about earlier in the semester, you have goals, you have mission, you have a vision, and you want to have those organizational objectives and make sure that you're keeping to them and not expanding outwards from them. Because otherwise, what ends up happening is you end up spiraling out of control and start creating strategies that don't seem to fit your actual brand, your actual positioning. So we're going to get into positioning in a second. I asked you the question, what do you think Addison's Wonderland could do to have sold the Sharks on their market strategy? Obviously, Addison's Wonderland had been looking at a premium market, and it makes sense that they would have maybe continued that high-end decor as they talked about, but there are potentials for other market strategies, looking at doing high-end and low-end, looking at focusing solely on boutiques, looking at distribution strategy, looking at potential marketing in terms of promotions. How do you get people into the door who are going to spend those higher amounts of money? So there's a lot of potential for different strategies in terms of who the market segment was and how you could potentially target them. So we narrowed down the target from a mass market. So let's say we're Nike, we come up with a shoe, it's meant for everybody, runners, walkers, joggers, people just hanging around. We then have concentrated markets. Okay? These concentrated markets are slightly more targeted, but they're around one specific attribute. So you see here in this instance, you see soccer cleats or football boots, you see basketball shoes, you see I don't know what these are, baseball, I think. In a differentiated, you see things that are outside the norm. So for instance, Nike also owns Bauer. They folded Bauer into their operations, and now they make hockey skates. Okay. The third is the niche marketing. And niche marketing is defined, well, I don't know that we defined it as such, but niche marketing are markets that there are very few people in that target market segment. Okay. So they tend to be, so we talked about how segmentation slices and dices the market. That makes sense that as we have the market sliced up into smaller pieces, one person might fit in a very small piece of overlapping parts of the market. Those are typically niche markets. So we look at a company like Netflix. Here's a couple of questions for you. The first of all is, what does Netflix offer to its consumers? Who is its consumer? Is it mass market? Is it niche market? Is it concentrated market? Do they appeal to one particular type of viewer? Do they appeal to multiple types of viewer? Does Netflix understand its consumers? There's been a lot of information on how Netflix collects data and what it uses that data for to make its own original programming. And can Netflix be countered by competitors? So look at Hulu, look at Amazon Prime Video, right? Those are two companies that are really trying to get at Netflix in terms of what they're offering. So can Netflix be countered, and how? Again, who is its market? Who are its competitors? I mean, who is its market? Who is its target market? So once we've established the market, broken it down into segments, and we've chosen out of those overlapping segments the appropriate target markets, we now look at positioning. And what positioning does is positioning looks at putting the product in the mind of the customer and occupying that in a certain part of the mind. So Reese and Trout wrote a book that's a standard bearer in positioning, and they said, quote, "Positioning is not what you do to a product, it's what you do in the mind of the prospect." So think about the consumer, whether that consumer is a regular individual consumer, whether that consumer is part of an organization. That is, you position the product in the mind of the prospect. So positioning, you're not literally putting it into the mind of the prospect, but you're trying to figure out psychologically how the consumer thinks about your product. Philip Kotler, who's also one of the quote-unquote marketing gurus, wrote that, quote, "Positioning is the act of designing the company's offering an image to occupy a distinctive place in the mind of the target market." Hold on, I'm just switching over again. Nobody's shoe. Okay, whoops. Okay, so again, you have the target market, you've segmented down, you've picked who it is you're strategically trying to target. Now you're going to occupy that place in their mind. So both of these are very broadly similar. They're all getting at how consumers, how your target thinks about you. So what do we mean, and how does positioning help as a strategy? Okay, here's two very similar products. You see very different positioning. On the left, we have Old Navy. I don't think it shows in the picture. No, it doesn't. The left is Old Navy. Sweaters, jeans, shop for women, styles starting at $19. On the right, you see H&M. Again, styles at $19.90. You know, it's the same, very similar price, but what you see is you have one that's fun, family, perfect fits for everybody. The other one is a little bit more fast fashion, a little bit classier. Both have the same price. Both are similar products. Each has different positioning. How about this one? This one has an espresso on the left. No, sorry, not espresso. That's Starbucks Verismo, a single cup pod, kind of like a Keurig. On the right, Nespresso. If anybody has seen Nespresso, it's kind of like Nestle's version of a Keurig. And you see on that one, Clooney is in that, hawking their single serving espresso machines. So on the left, you have a very simple, home-oriented, Starbucks-based machine. On the right, you have this classy, sophisticated, endorsed by Clooney, very simple Nespresso machine. Both are different. Both are very similar products, but both have very different positioning. So, how do we position a product? How do we position and make sure we get it in the mind of the target consumer? Well, one way of doing it is by using frames of reference. So what do we do when we use frames of reference? Well, we're using the SWOT analysis of our competitors. For instance, we can look at a competitor's strength, we can look at a competitor's weakness and find out what they're doing and how we can basically take their strategy and either mimic it, mirror it, or completely go the opposite way. So how do we do that? Well, SWOT analyses, and especially looking at competitor SWOT analyses, allow for what we call points of parity. Parity being similarities versus points of difference, which obviously are different. So we're looking at the SWOT analysis for things that our product does different or can do different, or things that we do similarly. So ask yourself the question, what are we doing? How can we provide value to consumers and take market share? How do we do this? We can take share of mind. So think about positioning in terms of, again, how the consumer sees us in their mind. If we can occupy a larger share of mind, then we're more likely to be able to gain market share as a result. So highlighting the similarities, highlighting the differences is very important. Think about the political campaigns right now, okay? We've talked about how various things can be marketed, and we market political candidates. One of the things that political candidates try and do is to show how they're similar within the party, but also where they're different from their competitors and how they can take share of mind by highlighting these points of difference that are advantageous, as well as points of similarity, points of parity that are similar. So Coca-Cola obviously has a lot of competitors, and one of the things that's been important is health consciousness. So Coca-Cola says, okay, we have to create more share of mind doing other operations. Who can we look at? Well, Poland Spring, okay? One of their major competitors is Poland Spring. So Coca-Cola says, okay, well, Poland Spring is a decent amount of market share in spring water. Why don't we look at how we can do it differently? So Coca-Cola says, let's create, instead of spring water or mineral water, let's create filtered water. And then we will use that as our big point of differentiation. We'll say that our water is cleaner, it's filtered, and so forth. And then we can model and sell it under the Coca-Cola brand. So that is how Coca-Cola might use a SWOT analysis for a competitor to show a difference from this competitor. Okay. Okay. Other frames of reference. Again, these are points of frequently points of different performance, right? You see here we have a Yugo, typically known in the communist bloc as being one of the worst cars of all time. Completely crappy, does not really run that well, always has to be serviced. That stands in contrast with a Ferrari, right? I think those are two drastically opposing frames of performance reference, but they demonstrate that obviously performance is a attribute of a product that you can show is drastically different. Again, it depends on your target market. And these are two different target markets for obvious reasons or historically obvious reasons. But sometimes, as we talked about, some people can only afford to have a lower performing product, such as a basic washing machine, as opposed to a high-end washing machine. So again, a point of difference may be targeted towards a specific target market. About price and quality, right? Taco Bell, Doritos, Tacos Locos, Locos Tacos, Tacos Locos, right? This is very common, a lower quality product. For cheap as well. Well, what can we contrast that with? How about Chipotle? You can spend $7, $8 on a burrito, get really full, non-GMOs, higher quality food, absolutely different than Taco Bell. Chipotle's brand positioning or product positioning has been on a higher quality product than your traditional fast food. And a lot of companies have done that recently, such as Five Guys burgers and fries, right? They position themselves a little bit more expensive and higher quality than your typical fast food restaurant like McDonald's or Burger King. How about positioning in terms of competitors, right? We have Coca-Cola here. Who do we think that they position against? Oh, that's fairly obvious. Pepsi, their main competitor. What's the frame of reference? Pepsi. So what they occupy is two different places in people's minds. People think of the taste of Coke as one. They think of Coca-Cola Classic. They think of all of these things. People who drink Pepsi are thinking of fresh, new, young, vibrant. They're thinking of a little bit different mindset than the way they would think about Coke and Pepsi. So these brands have positioned themselves around who their competitor is not. Coca-Cola is classic, Pepsi is young and now. Hold on. All right. How about different types of users or different products categories? Okay, so let me see if I can do this. All right. So different types of product categories, right? So we have Warby Parker, who's gained a lot of market share. One, because it's a lower price. Two, because it competes against who's compete against like lens crafters or your regular optometrists. We have product users, so you have trendsetters. Obviously, this is going to be slightly different even than the cheaper $6.95 glasses, prescription lenses included. So we have different frames of reference that we can make points of parity and points of similarity. Points of parity, like I mentioned, are the things that aren't unique to that brand. So if you come back to Pepsi versus Coca-Cola, you know that Pepsi and Coca-Cola are both colas. They're both sodas, whatever region of the country you're from, pop, anything like that, the carbonated beverages. Those two things are not unique to that brand. So if we look back, they're actually not unique to the product. They're unique to the brand. Okay, it's the way they position the brand around the product. So again, Pepsi has been fun. Coca-Cola is more classic, conservative. You even see that in the colors they've chosen. It's no coincidence that the colors of a classic red conservative, especially even given where they're based out of, Coca-Cola being from Atlanta, is red as opposed to blue for Pepsi, predominantly blue for Pepsi. It's not really a coincidence. So those things all are factored into how Pepsi and Coca-Cola position themselves against each other. Because on the product themselves, itself, it's not unique. Yes, they taste slightly different. The formulation is slightly different, but it's not unique, relatively speaking. And that's a whole nother topic unto itself in terms of how we identify with the brands and the products that we like. Some people only are Coke drinkers. Some people only are Pepsi drinkers. Hmm. This is all over. Come on. All right. So we've talked quite a bit about segmentation in terms of that. Let's go back to this. Where is it? Screen share. Now let's talk about points of difference. So the points of difference are the things that are unique to that brand. Okay. Two main points of difference. One is category membership, and two is the competitiveness. Okay. In category membership, you're talking about benefits that you offer. You're talking about ways that you can compare yourself to others or by saying what you have. And these three things are very similar. These things are saying we do this, we have this, we are doing this better than our competitors, and so forth. Those are ways to point out differences to consumers. That stands in contrast with competitive, where you're trying to negate your competitors' points of difference. For instance, they don't do it as good as us. Well, if you look at Avis, for instance, they have a famous brand slogan called "We Try Harder." Their whole goal is to say in that they're different from Hertz, they're different from Alamo, they're different from Dollar Rent a Car, they're different from all of these other places because they try harder. In essence, what we're talking about is this number two, where we compare ourselves to exemplars, right? We're going kind of towards a positive, we do better than everybody else. That's obviously a completely different type of position than a competitive position, pointing out the points of difference where they don't do it as good as you. Basically, in essence, you're trying to knock your competitor down. So instead of saying we try harder, maybe the competitive positioning would be they aren't as good as us, right? All the other car rental places do it worse. That's essentially what points of difference are. So once we figured out our positioning, let me see if I can stop this for a second. So once we figured out our positioning, we now shift to looking at consumer perceptions of our brand of our product. We're trying to figure out how to demonstrate what our positioning is relative to the marketplace. So in this next slide, we're going to talk about perceptual maps. So let's start screen share. Where did the screen share go? Okay, so in a perceptual map, what we're doing is we're trying to show and represent how different brands compare to each other on two different attributes. So you can see, I say, where your product or brand is relative to other competitors, what things are parity and what things are different. You can do two things with a perceptual map. One, you can identify market segments, and I'll show you how that works, how that could potentially work in a second. If you show where you're clustered, you can show how close you are, how similar you are to your competitors, and how different you are from your competitors. And based on those two attributes, you can position your brand towards a specific target segment. The second is you can show where you potentially want to move strategy. So think about brands that need to reposition themselves. Think about brands that are old. The Gap, for instance. The Gap wants to show that it's new, it's fresh, its stuff is not as conservative, it might be a little bit more playful. So it may show all of its competitors and then point out where it wants to occupy a specific place in the perceptual map. So you have two different beauty campaigns here on the right. One is Victoria's Secret, the Love My Body campaign, where everyone there you see is pretty much the same. They're all wearing lingerie, different lingerie for each one, and that's fine. It's showing that there's a certain body image type that it's appealing to. It's trying to position itself a certain way. That's as opposed to Dove, who launched a similar beauty campaign where different people of different backgrounds, of different body types, all wore the same piece of lingerie, but were showing off different things and appealing to a different target market. So what you see is that two beauty campaigns are drastically positioned towards different target markets. Obviously, the products are different, but so are the target markets, because the people buying Victoria's Secret may be different, or certainly are targeted differently than the people who are buying Dove. So a perceptual map would help get across how Victoria's Secret is different in terms of a beauty brand versus Dove as a beauty brand. Just bounce back, see if anybody has said anything. Okay. All right, so here we see a perceptual map of computer manufacturers. Some of these are maybe a little bit less known. So what you see is two different attributes. On the axis going vertically, you see price, expensive versus less expensive. On the horizontal axis, you see low quality versus high quality. Price and quality are two attributes that are frequently linked together because they correlate highly. If you have a product that is highly expensive, you expect that you're going to have high quality, as opposed to highly expensive with lower quality. Okay, so you can see how there are different clusters of brands in each quadrant, and each one is in a specific place in its quadrant. So what we would do is we would essentially take some market research to find out how people rate Dell on quality, maybe from a scale of -5 to +5. We might find out how they rate expensiveness on a scale of -5 to +5. And then that's where we would put our marker for them on this map. And then do that for each brand. Well, what happens? Well, I said that you can potentially use perceptual maps to identify target markets. So here's a potential target market. Hold on. Oops. High quality and expensive, right? Sony Vaio and Apple. These might be identified in this quadrant as a quote brand conscious consumer. How about another one? High quality, lower cost. Well, high quality for less expensive might be somebody who's looking for real good value. Obviously, the benefits are going to be outweighing the costs. How about this? Yes, there are people who are going to be wanting lower quality and are willing to pay less. We might call those people economic consumers. So that might be another target market. Finally, we have here this question mark. Who the heck is going to buy a product that is low quality and expensive? I don't know. Probably that's why these brands are not doing so hot, because they're expensive and low quality. Who their target market is, I'm not quite sure. But we can even use it to segment here. For instance, these are about the same level. They're slightly less expensive, but they're decent quality. Well, maybe these are not high value consumers, but mid-range value consumers. So as you get more competition and more data points from consumers through market research, you can get a more accurate perceptual map. So what might one look like? Well, how about this? Here's Ralph Lauren. You look at the dimensions. Instead of doing quality, they looked at athletic to casual to elegant. Okay, that makes kind of sense. Athletic to elegant. That's the one dimension that they're doing for that attribute. On the other vertical axis is obviously $4 signs versus $1 sign. So expensiveness. Well, Ralph Lauren has a variety of different brands in its brand portfolio that each one is meant to occupy a different part of a consumer's mind. So here, for instance, highly athletic and medium expensive, slightly expensive, is this RLX. A little bit less expensive and a little bit more casual is the tennis line. A lot less expensive is the rugby line. How about on the other side? The black label, the blue label, all of these are slightly more expensive, the black label being the most expensive. Actually, the Ralph Lauren collection, the most expensive in this area. And then you have over here more elegant but less expensive chaps. So you can see that each label in the Ralph Lauren portfolio of brands is meant to occupy a specific part of the brand portfolio. Each label is supposed to represent something different to the consumer. So potentially we want to get people who are more elegant and are willing to spend more. Well, here are the brands that do that. Maybe they want to be elegant but spend less. Well, there's Chaps. So what they've managed to do is have multiple brands, and when we talk a little bit about branding and different brands, we'll recognize this, that we can have portfolios of brands that appeal to different segments of the market, that appeal to different target markets. And that's exactly what's going on here at Ralph Lauren. Sometimes we have too many brands and we have to get rid of them because we don't know what they are actually intended for. We don't know what their target market is for. Perhaps their target market no longer exists and the brand itself has to be eliminated. It's too costly to keep the brand. Okay, we talked way back about the BCG matrix, cash cows, stars, dogs, question marks, right? Well, at some point, we might use a perceptual map when we're looking at multiple brands to figure out which products are similar, very similar, and which products have differences. Where are the points of parity? Where are the points of differences? Sometimes they can be done across competitors. Again, so you can see here, sometimes they can be done within a brand, an entire brand portfolio within the company. So I have here a perceptual map, and I'd like you guys to think and potentially post to, well, I'd like you guys to post to Slack. If you see, we've talked about how there's two different attributes, and we looked at the continuum of attribute 1 and the continuum of attribute 2. So what I'd like you to do, if you can draw it or take a picture of it or draw it on Photoshop or whatever you want to, hand draw it and then snap it and put it on Slack. If you want to describe it in words, that's fine. But I'd like you to look at picking two attributes for cars, right? You're all familiar with these car brands. These are all major car brands. There's 12 of them here. I'd like you to pick two attributes and try and place on the perceptual map where each brand goes relative to attribute 1 and attribute 2? How far up do you think it is relative to its peers? And once you've done that, I'd like to ask you guys if you think Lamborghini is an appropriate frame of reference. Why or why not? And there's no real wrong answer to that, but it's going to depend on how your perceptual map comes out. Because the attributes you pick may influence whether Lamborghini is an appropriate frame of reference. The attributes you don't pick may influence whether Lamborghini is an appropriate frame of reference. So I want you guys to think about it and post to Slack what you guys come up with for perceptual maps here. Okay. Okay. All right. So there's perceptual maps. Once we've figured out where we are positioned to, what it is we're trying to do, we can then look at our positioning statements. Oops. A positioning statement is kind of, we've talked about mission statements, we've talked about vision statements. What a positioning statement does is it really gets at defining what your positioning is relative to the competition. Okay? So we've talked about market segments and how we slice the market down. We've talked about targeting different markets for different reasons, mainly because we want to be able to identify their needs. We want to be able to figure out what marketing objectives we can satisfy. We want to be able to figure out how we can best execute using the marketing mix towards the most people in the target market. And then we learn to position in the mind of the prospect. So now having some sort of concrete statement, some sort of concrete definition of what it is we do and how we see ourselves relative to our competitors is slightly different than what we've done with vision statements, right? Those set the company objectives, but this sets how we see ourselves competing in the marketplace. So we start here, and I've kind of color-coded this, a positioning statement for the target group, right? Our target market. This can be very specific or not, but generally we try and be very specific. We're trying to be very specific. Brand X is the brand of, and then we have some sort of frame of reference, some sort of perception that competes mainly with, and then some sort of competitor, right? So we want to be able to say what we do and what our competitors do. That, and then we figure out some sort of differentiation, some point of difference, because our brand X offers what benefits? What do we do differently that do we do better? So, for the young at heart who value an infinite amount of choices, that's the target group. Amazon.com, the brand, is the virtual cookie jar. That's how we want to see ourselves, as a bunch of mix of things that people can just buy and take from. Competing mainly with all brick and mortar stores. Well, is that our competitor now? Yes. But do we have other competitors? Maybe. So maybe that has to be a little bit longer. That, and then again, a differentiating benefit is we give you the perfect combination of convenience, service, selection, and price, right? All of the things that are differentiating us from a brick and mortar store. Those are our differentiating benefits. And why? Because our brand, Amazon.com, and here's our benefit, offers a truly global selection of products. This is what Amazon is. Amazon is an online virtual company that is they just call themselves a cookie jar, but they compete with brick and mortar stores to be able to give you everything that a virtual retail shopping experience would do, because they have a global selection of products. That seems to make sense, doesn't it? So that's their positioning statement. That's how they see themselves relative to the marketplace. Just Amazon.com. That doesn't include other Amazon properties that they have, such as the Amazon Web Services and so forth. So we're just talking solely about Amazon.com. So we've already done some perceptual map work. What I'd like you to think about is how we've done some of these companies in class before. We've talked about them. How would you, based on your understanding of these companies and of the marketplace, how would you write positioning statements for Starbucks, for Target, for Walmart, for Nike? These are, again, companies that you're probably familiar with, and you're familiar with some of their competition as well. Obviously, Target is going to be different from Walmart. So this is an exercise I usually like to do in groups, in small groups, and if you have small groups, you're welcome to do that as well. But if you'd like to think about it, maybe for the exam or so forth, I'd like you to think about how you might go about writing a brand positioning statement. Now, this is not necessarily set in stone the way it's outlined here. Obviously, there's a lot of flexibility in how you say it and what you say. But what you see here in the positioning statement is a kind of a template, if you will, for how you would organize and determine your strategy, how you would end up determining where you stand relative to your competitors and putting it down in some sort of verbiage that allows you to come back to it at a later point in time. So, if we recall, we talked about using segmentation variables to slice and dice the consumer market. We've talked about marketers taking different segment variables to build markets back up, right? So you can segment by geography, psychology, psychographics, you can segment by usage, performance, benefits, all of those different things. Combine them back up to make up your target market. So your target market might be males that are African American, ages 18 to 24, who watch TV at, from the hours of 3 to 9 p.m., that use their smartphones frequently and are largely iPhone users, right? You can get very pigeonholed into how niche the market gets, but that's one of the things we want to do, is to potentially break down a mass market strategy, a mass market where everybody is targeted, towards a concentrated market where specific groups are targeted, towards niche strategies where really specific groups are targeted. And then again, we have differentiated strategies that basically come out of our core products. Different markets may align with different products. So we may have similar needs, but different wants. So again, when we're talking about using market segments to be able to create marketing strategy, to be able to link from what we do to who's going to respond, we need to be able to identify those needs, but also to identify why those needs exist. The needs may be the same, but the wants or the why the need exists may be different. Those are more towards socialization. And then we said that positioning helps to tie a product to a market. So we want to be able to position the product or the brand in particular to the target markets that we have in question as part of our strategy. So obviously those are important as well. So when we come back on Monday, what we're going to talk about is marketing research. Let's see, back, there we go. So we're going to return on Monday. We're going to talk about marketing research, and I'd like to maybe see if we can do some exercises with some focus groups and maybe surveys to do that as well, to be able to figure out how this all works and how we identify what information we have. You guys have the rest of the slides here as well to be able to look at some of the more text-intensive slides that I have, such as what primary research is, what secondary research is, why research is important, how we do research, and then maybe, like I said, if we can do an exercise in class, maybe that will get it a little bit more away from just the words that I have on the slide, which are obviously important, but people take 2-3 classes at multiple levels, ranging from undergraduate to MBA to MS in marketing analytics and so forth, to learn how exactly to do marketing research. Marketing research is a multi-billion dollar industry. So working with the numbers is something that is intimidating to a lot of people, but there are a lot of jobs in understanding how to get research done, how to get data, whether it's qualitative data or quantitative data, how to get data and how to analyze data to be able to present to companies so they can create marketing strategies. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit more on Monday, and I hope that everybody has a good weekend. We'll see you Monday. If anybody has questions, feel free to post to Slack over the weekend, and I will try to answer them. I'm moving tomorrow into our house, so it's going to be a little bit of a hectic weekend on my end, but I will do my best to answer as soon as I can. So until then, see everybody Monday.